Hi, welcome back to the channel. I'm Michelle, and today is the last video in the end of the year homeschooling series. The first one was homeschooling core subjects for my 5 and 9-year-old. The second one was family subjects, and this one is dedicated to social, emotional, mental health, how we did during our first year of homeschooling. So if you're new here, I have a 5, 9, 2-year-old. Obviously my 9 and 5-year-old were the ones being homeschooled. But I wanted to talk about some of the really good things about homeschooling this past year, some of the harder things, and then just some things I would share that I think would be helpful if you're going into your first year of homeschooling, or if you're just looking for some encouragement. So let's start with the really great things that happened this year. So I've seen a lot of personal growth with both of my kids, and it's interesting to see my oldest, who struggled with a lot of anxiety and self-doubt, self-esteem issues when it came to academic work, just because she dealt with a lot of perfectionism and she wasn't really challenged. If you're new here, she was previously in the public school system before this, so this was her first year at home. And to see her come into her own has been really great. She now, when she once struggled with math, it's now her favorite subject. Being able to stretch and see what she's capable is really interesting. To get past the, it's hard, it's overwhelming, I don't think I can do this, and knowing that she can actually do it has been really nice. And same with my 5-year-old. She started this year finishing preschool, and now she's finishing up most of her kindergarten work, and just to see her go from this little preschooler to someone who's actually capable of doing a lot more, and seeing that where her strengths and weaknesses are too. And it's funny because my kids are the exact opposite, where my 9-year-old, her strengths and weaknesses, my 5-year-old's the exact opposite. So being able to shift and be able to help them in the areas they need help has been really nice. To give them that personal academic help has been really nice. But like I said, my 5-year-old, noticing her strengths and where she excels has been really interesting. And I think my own personal growth as well with that. We've done a lot of social justice units in our homeschool. If you didn't know, social justice is one of our core subjects we teach. And just being able to learn alongside my kids has been really wonderful. It's like having a second chance at the education I didn't necessarily receive or wasn't very great. Being able to learn alongside them. And I think one of the best quotes I read, I think it was in the Wild and Free book, is that a lot of people see homeschooling as you're on top of the mountain instructing your child, what step to take, how the best route to get up that mountain is, when really it's you're climbing that mountain alongside them. Sometimes you will stumble together and sometimes you'll find your footing, but you're doing it together. And I think that sums up homeschooling very well, that it's a partnership of learning together. So that has been really nice. Obviously, having freedom of our own schedule has been really nice. Being able to take vacations when it lines up with my husband, so we can all spend a lot of time together and we can, do field trips. I've made a video about our Sabbath schedule and how that worked out really nice, and beginning to determine when we take breaks and when we need to take breaks is, of course, it was a learning experience, don't get me wrong, but it was really nice to have that freedom of determining how we use our time. So some of the harder parts, of course, I've talked about this in previous videos, is we had a lot of personal family losses this past year. And especially from October to probably January, it was very difficult. And I now have a better understanding and respect for people who homeschool during difficult times, whether it be, loss of a loved one, chronic illness, things like that. Just getting the motivation to do anything, let alone be in charge of your child's entire education, can be very difficult during those times. And a lot of those months we did the bare minimum and we got by. And frankly, a lot of them, like I said, is a blur to me. But we got through it, and it was definitely difficult, but it's I guess my main point is you can get through difficult things while homeschooling, you can make it through the other end. But especially coming off this was our first year, I think. We started in early August, and I lost my mom in the end of October. So it was like, we're 3 months into our homeschool year, and bam, this huge life-changing event happens. So it really jolted our already like new unsteady footing. So it was an interesting year, to say the least. Another difficult thing is just adjusting to the loss of my own personal time. It takes a lot to homeschool. I know a lot of people say it's easy and you do have freedom of your schedule, but it still takes a lot of your own personal time, whether that be researching curriculum or figuring out how you're going to implement that curriculum, especially when you add, multiple children, figuring out what times work to do when, and it's a lot. It's a lot to take on. And it's not necessarily all bad, but it is a sacrifice of your own personal time. And as moms or parents in general, we don't have a lot of time for ourselves. So that was a difficult adjustment, trying to find slivers of time for myself. Obviously, money. Going into our first year, I had no idea how much we would spend or how much would be. And some of it was definitely, I do have a budget video if you're curious how I broke it down for our first year. But some of it, of course, we spent more because it was our first year, trying new things. There was a lot of naiveness going into certain curriculum. But it was definitely a cost. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed too when you homeschool, that it is, and people will tell you can do it for cheap or free. And I just personally don't agree with that. At some point, you will need to access resources outside yourself, outside the library. And it is an expense. I mean, it was a manageable expense for our family, but again, it's something that was pulled from somewhere else that could have opportunity cost, right? When you choose one thing, you're giving up something else. Another difficult aspect was my toddler, my 2-year-old. He, like I said, during that difficult October to January months, he decided to drop his second nap, so he only naps about 2 hours sometime mid-afternoon, and that makes it difficult. Homeschooling with a toddler is extremely difficult. Now, I never would have said this previously because my girls were definitely, I guess, not a typical toddler, but my 2-year-old, my youngest son, he is like a little tiny tornado. He's very loud and destructive. And he's definitely a child you have to constantly watch because he likes to get into things. And he's very bright and energetic, but he can be very destructive as well and do things that aren't always safe for him. So having to constantly keep an eye on him while helping the girls with their work was definitely difficult. So we definitely had to adjust our schedule to fit our core subjects during when he slept, because it just wouldn't be possible without. Not only is he distracting and have to be constantly watched for his own safety, and we tried things like, baby gates and the little doorknob things. He figured them all out. He's not a kid that's gonna sit at the table and do Play-Doh while I teach. No, he's out running and being crazy. That's just who he is. So adjusting that was really difficult, and kudos to all you moms or parents out there that are homeschooling with toddlers running around, because they definitely make it a lot harder. But again, like I said, we found a good routine, but I'm sure that will change. Once he drops his last nap, it'll be a free-for-all. The other hardest thing I would say is finding homeschool support. And what I don't mean like a spouse or friends, but I've talked about in previous videos how in my area there's pretty much 2 large groups, a classical conversations group and a conservative Christian group, and I don't fit into either of those groups. And going into this, it's very important you have support from whether it be other parents, other moms, people going through these experiences, not just to talk about curriculum and what doesn't work and what does, but to talk about your own personal mental health and how you get through difficult situations. Having that support to lean on is very important. Especially early on, it was difficult to find that. And eventually I did find that support group, but it was a struggle to find it when you're kind of an outsider in the homeschooling community. So those are kind of the positives and the difficulties we had this past year. Now, what I would leave you with, my wisdom after 1 year of homeschooling, would be that it's not going to be easy. And that's okay, because guess what? Parenting isn't easy. It's worth it, but you will have stumbles and you will have kids crying. You will feel like crying or screaming at points, and that's okay. That's normal. It's not going to be picture perfect and fun all the time, and that's completely fine. There's going to be struggles, bad days and good days, but you'll get through it. Another one would be to value other people's perspectives. I think it's very easy, especially in the homeschooling world, to see these groups kind of segregate themselves based on, what they believe or what they teach or what philosophy of education they follow. I think we can get a lot of value from listening to people's perspectives that aren't necessarily the same as ours. We can learn a lot from each other, and having just an open mind and going at people with kindness instead of judgment would be very important. I think going along with that too is not to be overly influenced by others' choices, especially being new or being naive to the homeschooling community. It's very easy to think, well, they have it all together. Their kids are doing great. This must be the way to do it. No, we're seeing those pretty Instagram pictures and, all set up, showing something great. It doesn't have to be that way. Sometimes we feel, or we get that self-doubt that we're not doing enough or we're not good enough based on what we see others are doing. And I would definitely say, if you're new to homeschooling, be very careful what you let influence you. And I was definitely affected by this too. I tried things that I knew wouldn't fit or weren't where we aligned. And just because it worked for so many people, that so many people said it was so great that, it has to work great. No, it doesn't. Each family is unique. Each child is unique. And there's no magical unicorn curriculum that's going to be a perfect fit. You will always have some kind of adjustment. So just be careful about who and what you let influence your homeschooling life, because a lot of it, I think, would be another one, leads to a lot of self-doubt, especially your first year homeschooling. You have a lot of self-doubt. Am I doing this right? Am I enough? I made a video on this. I'll link it up above about my biggest fear is that, essentially I'm going to not be good enough and screw up my child's education, which, again, totally normal fear and doubt to have, totally normal fear and doubt I still have. But I've come to trust myself a lot more in that situation. And I think anytime we do anything outside the norm, so for example, homeschooling, you'll always get these outside opinions telling you, quizzing your kids or asking about socialization or all the dumb questions people ask you when you homeschool. Having your own conviction in yourself, knowing that you are doing what's best for your child. Not what's best for you necessarily, but what's best for your child. And remembering that, because you will go through difficult parts, but remembering that this is something you came to for your child. And as parents, we all know we can do a lot for our kids, even when it's difficult. So learning to trust yourself in the decisions you make. And my last one is, it will constantly be changing. And this is both good and negative. Once you get a nice schedule down and things are running smoothly, something happens, somebody drops a nap, there's a loss. Things will constantly be changing. As soon as you feel like, and I think that's with parenting in general, as soon as you feel like you got an age down or developmental stage down with your kid, they change, right? And you're in a whole new situation. And the same is with homeschooling. And remember that, because it is good, but when you're going through those moments when you're struggling or getting pushed back, that it will pass. And I remind myself of that often, that this is a difficult part right now, but it will pass. Soon they will be able to do more. Soon they'll be able to do this. They're constantly changing physically, emotionally, mentally. Their brains are developing. They're going to constantly be changing. Your curriculum, your schedule, everything will constantly be changing. That can be difficult because I'm a very planner, list making type person, and it's difficult when things are constantly changing because you constantly have to pivot. So learning to let go of some of that control and embrace the chaos is my final piece of advice, that it will change. It won't always be like this. You'll always be moving on to something new, which is really exciting at the same time. So if you have any questions, leave them down below. If not, thank you for watching.